perspective presented by the New Orleans Secular Humanist Association, following our few principles of humanism.
We're committed to the use of science and reason for understanding the universe and for solving human problems. We're skeptical of untested claims of knowledge, but we're open to new ideas.
We are concerned with securing justice and fairness in society and in ending intolerance and discrimination. We are committed to the total separation of religion and government.
We affirm humanism as a realistic alternative to the theologies of despair and the ideologies of violence. We reject the concept of an afterlife and believe in living a full and rewarding life here and now.
We value and respect each individual's right to judge and lead their lives according to their own position, as long as it's respectful of other people living in a free society.
We hope you enjoy today's program and others in the weeks to follow. Hello again. Thanks for being with us. It's always a pleasure to present our programs. And today our guest is Jim Dugan, who is a member of our organization and serving on the Secular Humanist Board of Directors. Jim is a doctoral candidate in the field of anthropology at Tulane University and hopes to very soon complete that program. And so today we're going to talk about the difference between fact and mythology. Jim, tell us about that.
Well, thank you, Harry, very much for this opportunity to talk about a subject that's very, very interesting to me, and that's this topic of pseudoscientific literature, this vast array of books and television programs that claim that mainstream science has just got it wrong somehow, that biologists and historians and archaeologists and anthropologists in mainstream thought have just somehow gotten the wrong idea, and that they are underestimating the technology that ancient people had, and that somehow great civilizations that we don't know about, whether from this planet or some other planet, must have existed here on Earth in the ancient past.
I think they probably have some supporting facts for those positions, don't they?
Well, they claim to have some kinds of evidence, but the evidence they put together is often more of drawing innuendos, applying an idea like, well, it kind of looks like, but not really developing hard facts, not really doing the detailed, stepwise accumulation of information and interpretation that sciences usually require.
But are you suggesting that there are large numbers of people who actually accept those stories as factual?
Well, apparently so. We can only judge by the fact that books like Chariots of the Gods and Fingerprints of the Gods are bestsellers, translated into many languages and sold all over the world, or that programs like the Ancient Aliens on the History Channel
Yes.
seem to be wildly successful.
I watch the Ancient Aliens frequently, and they're very well-produced shows.
Very well-produced shows.
And they present what could be deemed to be supportable evidence, but you're saying that if you dig into their evidence a little deeper, that it doesn't hold up? Is that your
It doesn't
position?
hold up. And we'll take a look in just a minute at one specific detail as an example. Much of this evidence, if you really examine it very carefully, comes across as very, very weak at best, possibly even manufactured, certainly just the result of somebody taking a very imaginary interpretation and not really building up the facts that are necessary to make it convincing.
When you say manufactured, is it, in your opinion, that many of the people who produce these television programs and write the books don't believe their stories themselves?
That's a hard thing to say. In some, and it might vary from source to source and program to program and book to book, but I suspect that the authors and producers of this material get enough pushback from mainstream scientists that they have to know there's some flaws and that there should be some doubts. And I think they probably realize that they're pushing the little bit of evidence they have much further than logically it can really go.
But the ones who have published the books, and certainly the ones who do that television program, are making money.
That much is certain. You know, somebody gets a royalty.
That would be a good incentive for believing something you don't even believe. We are in a capitalistic society, and I'm just wondering how many of these people are doing it just for the financial reward.
I certainly have my suspicions about that. These people are definitely making a lot of money off of these items.
Now, is there someone similar to you who debunks those things? Is there some way that you can make money out of this?
It's harder. There are books, for example, that debunk Eric von Däniken's Chariots of the Gods. There was a book published a long time ago called Crash Go the Chariots, for example. It deals with the source book point by point. Nowhere near as successful, nowhere near as popular. People want the romance of the pseudoscientific literature. It has an appeal that's very emotional, and there's a certain amount of don't bother me with the facts kind of approach.
Yes, well, I understand that. And I know you brought in a few books with you. Is there anything you wanted to say about any of those books that you brought?
Well, I'll be showing some examples of those books in the video that we're about to see.
All right. Well, you want to go to the video now, or you want to introduce it in some way?
Well, let me just introduce this by saying that in a previous program we've talked a little bit about pseudoscience and what it is, and here we're going to take a look at one specific example, one kind of evidence that appears in many of these books and programs. So let's take a look at that video now.
In an earlier program, we mentioned some of the common characteristics of pseudoscientific literature, such as claiming that scientists are too closed-minded, failing to grasp mainstream theory, and building on obsolete scholarship. In this program, we'll examine one of these characteristics of pseudoscience, a tendency to claim that some antique maps challenge the mainstream understanding of history. The allegation is that some such maps are anachronistic, containing information that was not available at the time the maps were drawn. Two key claims are made about these maps. One is that they show the Antarctic continent in significant geographic detail, although Antarctica was not discovered until much later. The other claim is that the Piri Reis map shows the curvature of the Earth's spherical surface projected onto flat paper using a method that would not be feasible in 1513. The pseudoscientific claim is that the mainstream understanding of history cannot explain the contents of these maps, so the mainstream understanding is wrong. Instead, there must have been an advanced civilization with high technology on Earth in the ancient past. Some speculate that this advanced civilization arose here on Earth but is unrecognized today, while others claim it came from some other planet. A number of pseudoscientific works make these claims. One example is Erich von Däniken's 1968 book, Chariots of the Gods, and a documentary film based on that book, both of which claim that Earth was visited by aliens in ancient times. Another example is Graham Hancock's 1995 bestseller, Fingerprints of the Gods, which claims that an earthly civilization of the ancient past had unspecified high technology. One more of many examples is Ancient Aliens, a television series currently airing on the History Channel. A number of antique maps are used to support these claims. We'll look at just 3 of these as examples: the Bosch map of around 1739, the Oronteus Vinius map of around 1532, and the more famous Piri Reis map of about 1513. But first, A few facts. This modern map from Wikipedia shows Antarctica in blue, centered on the South Pole. This shows the continent with its permanent ice cap. Some of the details shown here will be important when we look at the antique maps in more detail. Note the relative positions of South America, Africa, Australia, and New Zealand, and the amount of open sea between Antarctica and each of these. Also note the Antarctic Peninsula, an arm of land that reaches up toward the southern tip of South America. Antarctica was not discovered until 1820 or thereabout. Seismic surveys showing the Antarctic continent that lies below the polar ice cap were not produced until the 20th century. So any map printed before 1800 that includes Antarctica is supposed to challenge mainstream history. But speculation that there must be a continent at the South Pole dates back at least to the time of Ptolemy in the 1st century AD. Such speculations were based on ideas about the perfection and symmetry of the Earth's spherical shape, and not on real data. In fact, speculations usually projected a continent much larger than Antarctica turned out to be. One example is the Ortelius map, dating to about 1570. Two things are obvious at even a glance. One is that the known continents are, by today's standards, distorted and incomplete. Another is that the map depicts a continent centered on the South Pole. But this continent is impossibly huge. It is obviously imaginary and is an example of speculation about a southern continent. It cannot possibly be based on actual exploration or measurement. But enough facts. Back to the world of imagination. We start with the Bois map of around 1739. It is centered on the South Pole, allegedly showing what Antarctica looked like under the ice cap, something impossible at that time. This claim does not stand up to closer scrutiny, though. For one thing, the open area in the middle of Antarctica is plainly marked conjecturé in French, meaning that it was a matter of conjecture and not a known fact. Australia is circled in red on the lower right of the map. Its coastline is quite incomplete, more typical of the knowledge of the early 1700s than of some unidentified advanced civilization. New Zealand, circled in blue, is shown as part of the Antarctic continent rather than as a set of separate islands, which is just plain wrong. In fact, the outline of Antarctica bears little resemblance at all to that found on a modern map, with or without the ice cap. This drawing, from Hancock's Fingerprints of the Gods, implies that the Bois map's version of Antarctica, which is on the left, is comparable to a modern seismic survey of subglacial topography, shown on the right, at least if we allow for changes in sea level and ice cover. But as we're about to see, these two images have been oriented to make their similarities appear greater than they really are. With the Antarctic Peninsula pointing northward on the modern seismic survey map on the left, the southern tip of South America has to be above and a little to the left, as shown on the modern map on the right. Here we've turned the Bois map so that South America is in the same position as in the modern map on the right, giving both maps the same orientation. The difference between the properly aligned Bois map on the left and the redrawing of it as it appears in Fingerprints of the Gods is obvious when the two images are placed side by side. And in this proper alignment, Antarctica, as shown in the Bois map, no longer resembles the modern seismic survey map. The drawing in Fingerprints of the Gods, then, is misleading because the two versions of Antarctica are not shown in the same orientation. That is, the two images have different reference points for north, south, east, and west. Moving further back in time to about 1532, the Oronteus-Vanias map shows the northern hemisphere on the left and the southern hemisphere on the right. The northern hemisphere is illustrated with the North Pole near the center of the page. It shows Europe, Asia, and northern Africa. The details of these are reasonable, but only by the standards of 1532, not by those of a high-tech civilization. A small part of what looks like South America is shown at the upper left of the map, circled here in red. And the far eastern portion of North America, circled in blue, is shown near the center of the map. No other parts of North or Central America are shown on the map, a rather serious omission if it was produced from data supplied by an advanced society. Turning to the southern hemisphere on the right-hand side of the map, we can readily identify the southern cone of South America and the southern tip of Africa. But when compared to a modern map, the Oronteus map places South America and Africa too close to Antarctica, making Antarctica far too large. The Oronteus map also omits the Antarctic Peninsula that should be reaching up toward South America, and gives Antarctica an outline it simply never had. In other words, the Oronteus-Vanias map is more likely to show a conjectured continent than the results of actual exploration. A slightly older map, the Piri Reis map of 1513, has long been fodder for pseudoscientific claims. It shows the southern Atlantic Ocean. The western part of Africa, with Spain just above it, can be seen on the right. On the left is the coast of some part of the Americas, dominated by what appears to be the eastern tip of Brazil. In the depiction of Spain, Africa, and the entrance to the Mediterranean Sea, the level of geographic accuracy is consistent with the year 1513 without any high-tech assistance. It is often claimed that the bottom of the map shows the coast of Antarctica passing under South America toward Africa. That interpretation is unsupportable, though. It shows Antarctica attached directly to South America at far too high a position and omits the southern cone containing Argentina and Chile. Instead, the landmass at the bottom might be the South American cone itself, distorted in size and position. Or it might be an imaginary southern continent of unrealistic size. Neither interpretation is consistent with high-tech knowledge of earthly geography, but either would be consistent with an ordinary map produced in 1513. Another allegation is that the oddities of the Americas, as depicted in the Piri Reis map, can be explained by assuming that the old map is based on an azimuthal equidistant projection, a modern map-making technique that requires mathematical abilities that didn't exist in the 16th century. As shown here from Hancock's Fingerprints of the Gods, such a projection does give South America a flattened and elongated appearance, something like that of the Piri Reis map. But it is impossible to get the Piri Reis map to line up with the modern projection. Tilting the Piri Reis map so that South America lines up as closely as possible with the modern projection reveals two problems. One, that the coastline of South America, as shown on the two maps, still doesn't match. And two, that lining up South America requires tilting Africa and Spain clockwise to an impossible degree. In addition, the modern projection does not account for the landmass at the bottom of the Piri Reis map. The facts are quite different from the claims that are made. Even a brief look at the maps shows that they contain errors and omissions that are quite understandable in the time period in which each map was drawn. Modern map-making techniques, such as the ballyhooed equidistant azimuthal projection, do not account for the errors and omissions. Those errors and omissions would be hard to understand if the maps were made by any kind of advanced or high-tech civilization. Illustrations of Antarctica appearing on antique maps are obviously speculations and are not drawn from actual exploration or measurement. In some of the pseudoscientific sources, comparisons between the antique maps and modern maps are done in a misleading manner. In some, there is no evidence of anything unusual in these antique maps, nor anything to challenge the mainstream understanding of earthly history. Books and videos claiming that antique maps are evidence of an advanced civilization existing on Earth in the past, whether terrestrial or extraterrestrial, are practicing pseudoscience. They should be read for entertainment, but not edification.
Well, Jim, that was a persuasive presentation that debunked a theory that some of the mythology carries. What do you make of the presentation we just saw?
Well, we could, of course, draw out a lot more details about these maps. It's possible to analyze this at much more length than maybe most people would have the patience to look at. But I don't think we need to. I think we can look at this at the level that we've just seen and see that there really is nothing extraordinary in these antique maps. There's nothing that doesn't fit the mainstream thinking about human history as we currently understand it. Scientists can be wrong, of course. Science is by its nature revisionary. We admit our mistakes when we find evidence. The question, of course, is there evidence?
What you're saying in this particular case, which is just an example of unproven theories of these events, in this particular case, that the people who were presenting their evidence didn't go far enough in their own studies and examination to come up with the facts which were there to be had. Is that what that was
Very
telling
much
us?
So. They didn't go anywhere near far enough.
All right. Now, that was one example of that kind of mythology that that people are buying. What are some of the others for which the facts are equally as obtainable, but have not been sought after by these people who are purveying these other concepts?
Well, that's a very, very large field.
Okay.
Of course, you have the entire field of pseudoscience, these ideas that kind of masquerade as scientific, that masquerade as having some kind of material, physical, or logical evidence. And then, of course, you can expand that even beyond that, because the same kind of jumping to conclusions from very little to no evidence can be applied to mythology and even many aspects of religion.
Are you saying that the creationist explanation of the beginning of the universe and life, is that falling into the same category as this mythology?
Well, creationism falls into this category very, very much so. Of course, creationism, depending on the version of creationism you're talking about, can be a pseudoscience. It often parades as a science with making scientific claims and claiming to have scientific evidence. But it can also be a very specific religious belief that the book of Genesis is literally true and that we really shouldn't argue or even discuss it.
Well, there are masses of people who accept that as factual. Are they the same people who accept these other pseudoscience propositions. Is there some overlap there?
I think there's overlap, but it's kind of interesting that there's many different subgroups of followers of pseudoscience or beliefs without evidence, and it's interesting that someone who accepts the idea that ancient astronauts visited the Earth and left some traces of that may or may not be a creationist, or may not believe in the Loch Ness Monster or Sasquatch.
Well, would you find to be unsupportable, the monster?
All of the above.
Okay.
But people seem to choose their romance. What particular bizarre idea that doesn't have evidence appeals to them is a very individualized kind of choice.
Now, you and I, as secular humanists, place great value on supportable evidence and facts, and feel that a person has to be in a position to justify their proposition, right? Which is why we have become non-religious, because we have not seen the evidence to support a supernatural being, nor have we seen the evidence for the Loch Ness Monster. Well, give us a few other examples of this kind of mythology that is accepted by a lot of people.
Well, I named a few, like there are, and you see the same programs on the History Channel or some other things on television. There are people out in the woods hunting for Sasquatch, even as we speak. There are claims about the alignment of the pyramids to ancient constellations that only would have worked 10,000 years ago and don't work today. That the entire outer crust of the Earth once slipped along the inner mantle of the Earth and repositioned Antarctica, and that was where the mother civilization of the ancient past was, and went out and seeded the great civilizations of Egypt and the Maya, etc.
I see. Well, but this was just created by someone's thinking? I mean, did they see any evidence of that?
Well, they may have seen some very vague hints. The problem is you have to make a difference between coming up with an idea, a possibility, and supporting it with evidence. You know, you might get an idea because one thing looks like this or one thing suggests that, but you have to go further. You have to build scientific evidence to actually say this is true.
There are people who would say that you scientists lack spirituality. Mm-hmm. How do you respond to that?
Sometimes true. Many scientists, of course, are very spiritual people, but many are not. And science doesn't require spirituality to do the job of science. It requires evidence.
All right. So what you would like our audience to take from our show today is that they should be skeptical when they are presented with these concepts which may appear to be too good to be true.
You know what they say about things that are too good to be true? And I would add, extraordinary evidence always requires, no, I said that wrong. Extraordinary claims always require extraordinary evidence.
I see. Well, let me just say to our audience that we're very happy to have had you with us today, and we hope that we will see you again often in the future.
Thank you so much.